Hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Paul Golan, and I am Executive Director of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. Our social justice initiative is called Jews for a Secular Democracy. It's pluralistic. We're trying to bring Jewish religious and secular viewpoints to separation of church and state and advocate and educate around how important that's been for Jews in America and how challenged it is these days. And I think if you're paying any attention at all, you realize that we just had a perhaps historically terrible week for the separation of church and state. And we may touch on some of those issues, but tonight we are going to be talking about child marriage and forced marriage. And I learned that there is a component that is related to religious fundamentalism, but that's not the only piece of the issue, and it goes far beyond that. And I think on all of these things, including the overturning of Roe v. Wade, we can look at it through this lens of separation of church and state, but it's also about power, and it's also about misogyny, and it touches on so many things. And I was lucky enough to speak with our guest speaker beforehand and really got a better understanding for this. So I'm really looking forward for this, for all of us to be able to have this conversation with Fraidy Reiss. So let me introduce Fraidy, and I'm gonna first spotlight her so everyone can see her. So I will give a little background. Fraidy Reiss is founder and executive director of Unchained at Last, a survivor-led nonprofit organization dedicated to ending forced and child marriage in the United States through direct service and advocacy. Fraidy's research and writing on forced and child marriage have been published extensively, including in the New York Times, Washington Post, and Journal of Adolescent Health, and by Oxford Press, making her one of the foremost experts on these abuses in the United States. And I left out of the bio all of your personal story because that's going to be my first question, because it is, I think, powerful and moving and frankly, for me, inspirational of what you overcame. And so much of it was really said well in your TED Talk, and I don't want you to completely repeat it, but I will send everybody a link in a follow-up email because you have to see your TED Talk. It's incredible. But can you tell folks a little bit about how this is a personal issue for you, what your story is that led you to do this work, and welcome, first of all.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate your having me here, and all of you for being a part of this really important conversation. And it's also just great to see Jews standing for the right things, because it's very, very different from the Jewish community where I grew up. Because I grew up in New York City. So shout out, there was one of you who's from Brooklyn. Shout out to Brooklyn. Yes, that's right, Paul, as well. So I grew up in Brooklyn, but I grew up in the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community. So, you know, unfortunately in that community, forced marriage remains the norm. And for me, my family married me off when I was 19 to a stranger, very little input from me. And as a bride, I was actually forced to undergo a virginity exam. I was subjected to a gynecological exam to confirm that my hymen was intact. I mean, that's how extreme it was in that the community where I grew up. And the stranger that I was forced to marry turned out to be violent and abusive, something I learned only 1 week after our wedding. But I was trapped because I had, within that community, I had, first of all, no sexual or reproductive rights. This was before Roe v. Wade was overturned. So this was when at least some women or some people had reproductive rights in this country. But within that community, I had no sexual reproductive rights. I was forced to have unprotected sex with my husband and forced, therefore, to have 2 children without my consent. My first child was born 11 months after my wedding, and pretty soon I had 2. So, you know, loss of sexual reproductive rights means, and a forced marriage means often a forced parenthood as well. And that was the case for me. I also had no financial rights. I wasn't allowed to have my own bank account or credit card, any of my own money. I was required to be financially dependent on my husband. And I had limited legal rights. Under Orthodox Jewish law, a man is allowed to divorce his wife, but a woman does not have that right. I didn't have the legal right to end my own marriage. So I was trapped really the only one way out for me would have been if my family had agreed to take me back in, and they refused to take me back in. So trapped 15 years it took me to escape from this abusive marriage. And when I finally got out, my family and the community retaliated by shunning me. They declared me dead. My family told me they were going to sit Shiva for me, go through the Jewish mourning ritual for me as if I had literally died. And till it's been more than a decade later, they still consider me dead and I have no contact. But I rebuilt my life and I founded Unchained at last to help others in the United States to escape a forced marriage. And at first we were focused specifically on the direct services, helping individuals to escape a forced marriage. But because more and more girls under age 18 were reaching out to us to beg for the same help we were providing to adults, please help us escape a forced marriage, we realized the United States has not only a forced marriage problem, we have also a serious child marriage problem. And that was why we took on this little project. We're a tiny team at Unchained at last, and we took on this little project in our spare time. We were going to end child marriage in the United States of America.
So can you help folks understand how you're differentiating between forced marriage and child marriage? Like, what are the official definitions there?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. So a forced marriage, the internationally accepted definition of a forced marriage is one in which one or both parties do not give full free consent. And it can happen at any age. So for me, it happened at 19. A child marriage is one in which one or both parties is under the age of 18 at the point of entry into the marriage. And one of the problems with child marriage is how easily it can be forced. So there's some overlap because some forced marriage happens to children and a lot of child marriage is forced, but they are two distinct human rights abuses, both of them recognized as human rights abuses, and forced marriage is recognized as a form of modern slavery, in fact. And
can you give us a sense, if you know, how prevalent this is in the US?
Oh, I do know. Because as you said, this is something I've researched extensively. So, well, first, before I even go into the statistics, I'm curious if anyone here knows the youngest age somebody can marry right now in the United States, in any state. If you want to like unmute yourself and shout it out or put it in the chat, anybody want to guess the youngest age you can marry right now in the United States?
14.
Okay, somebody thought 14. Somebody does not have a lot of faith in our country for good reason. Anyone else want to guess?
6 is the low so far.
Someone thought 16.
11.
What if I told you all these guesses were too high? What if I told you the answer is 0? There are still multiple US states that do not specify any minimum age for marriage. And when we first started looking into this at Unchained at Last in 2015, more than half of the United States did not specify any minimum age for marriage. It was 0, which by the way, put all those states' laws in line with laws in Iran and Yemen. Those are 2 countries Human Rights Watch has identified that don't specify a minimum age for marriage. In terms of how often this is happening, well, for a long time, nobody really knew how often this was happening. And so just to back up, right now, well, when we first started looking at this in 2015, and as recently as 2018, child marriage or marriage before 18 was legal in all 50 US states. And it's still legal in most states, as I'll explain soon. And nobody knew, though, how often it was happening because nobody had ever paid any attention to this. Nobody had researched this. This was, for the most part, really just old laws that were still on the books. And I think legislators didn't know about it or thought, well, those are old laws. No one's actually doing this. But we at Unchained at Last, we actually retrieved the data. We went to all 50 states and we retrieved the marriage certificate data. And what we discovered was that between 2000 and 2018, 300,000 minors were married in the United States. A few of them were as young as 10. Most of them, though, were age 16 or 17. And almost all were girls married to adult men who were an average of more than 4 years older. And we've also found, when comparing the marriage data with the statutory rape laws, that at least 60,000 marriages in that time period occurred at an age or with a spousal age difference that should have been considered a sex crime. So we're talking about a really prevalent and horrific human rights abuse happening here in the United States. And Paul, looks like you have another question, but I can also explain like why this is so problematic. It doesn't just sound bad.
Sure. Yeah. No, go ahead.
All right. Yeah, so child marriage, so many reasons that we need to end child marriage today, and so many reasons that we at Unchained have taken on this mission of, in addition to ending forced marriage, we're determined to end child marriage in the United States. But I want to focus on the three most important ones. One is how easily a child marriage can be forced. And it has nothing to do with maturity. We're not arguing that you wake up on your 18th birthday and suddenly you're mature and wise and you can choose a life partner. No, this has to do with legal capacity. You wake up on your 18th birthday and magically you have the rights of adulthood. Even a day before your 18th birthday, when you don't have those rights, you can so easily be forced into a marriage or forced to stay in a marriage because you cannot easily take the basic steps that an adult would take to escape a forced marriage. So, Paul, when adults reach out to us at Unchained at Last, it's never easy to escape a forced marriage, but we're usually able to help them. But the main things that we help survivors do in that situation are just not options for someone who is 18, even the most mature 17-year-old. The first thing that we do is help people to leave home, to escape, because they're not safe in their own home. And that's whether they're facing a forced marriage that's an impending marriage or they're already in a marriage that they didn't choose. We help them leave. A minor is not allowed to leave home. A minor who leaves home is a runaway. The police can take them back home against their will. In some states, a minor can be charged with a status offense for leaving home. And we as advocates, if we help minors leave home, in many states, we can face criminal charges. That actually happened in one of the cases that we worked on. One of our volunteers was charged criminally for helping a 14-year-old girl escape. If a minor manages to escape without getting taken into police custody and manages to get into a domestic violence shelter, manages to get to a domestic violence shelter, almost guarantee the shelter is going to turn them away. Across the United States, domestic violence shelters routinely turn away unaccompanied minors because there are liability issues and often funding guidelines and sometimes even statutes that prevent domestic violence shelters from taking in unaccompanied minors. An adult in this situation might say, well, this is really complicated. I don't know what to do. I'll retain an attorney to help me figure this out. Contracts with minors are typically voidable. They're a worthless piece of paper. Attorneys don't want to take on clients who are minors based on a worthless retainer agreement. We've had girls call and say, I called every attorney in my state. No one will take me on as a client. And then perhaps most shockingly, think about it. Minors are not allowed to bring a legal action in their own name typically, which means they're often not even allowed to file for divorce. And it's just mind-boggling when you think about it, because a minor is not allowed to enter into a marriage on their own accord in any US state. The way it happens typically is parents get to make this decision for them or a judge. And often no input required from the minor at all. It's just their parents signing a form or a judge rubber stamping a petition. So they can be entered, it's kind of like what happened to me. They can be entered into a marriage with no input from them and then not allowed to file for divorce. So we're creating a nightmarish legal trap. And what often happens is when girls call us at Unchained and they beg for help, and we have to be honest and tell them how limited their options are. In many cases, they turn to suicide attempts and self-harm because that really seems like the only way out for them. Yeah. And then if that's not horrific enough, consider also that marriage before 18 is recognized as a human rights abuse. That's not my words, that's the United States State Department. Marriage before 18 produces devastating lifelong repercussions, including here in the US. Girls who marry before 18 in the US, it destroys their health, their education, their economic opportunities, even their physical safety. It makes them much more likely to experience physical and sexual violence within the marriage. And then number three, again, if I haven't fully convinced you, also marriage before 18 destroys sexual and reproductive rights. Because of marriage, a child marriage means that a girl or a woman is much more likely to be forced to have unprotected sex, like what happened with me, forced to endure pregnancy, childbirth, and child rearing without their consent. And, reproductive rights used to mean something in this country, but as of this week, not anymore. So
certainly
really,
less so. And that was actually one of my questions when we were talking about the age for marriage being 0, no age. But my question was going to be, which you answered, do parents have to provide the consent? And so they do, but then I presume they've never been held liable or responsible for what then happens. Like if a girl is abused at age 14 in a marriage that they signed off on, they've got no responsibility, I presume.
Yes, and so here's the thing. So states call it parental consent. Mm-hmm. I'm going to tell you, what we have seen is that this is often actually parental coercion. And no, it's perfectly legal. There's nothing here that, I mean, we don't know of a lot of survivors who want to bring a legal action against their own parents for doing this to them, but this is completely legal. It is completely legal. And we have worked with survivors, by the way, who showed up at the clerk's office sobbing openly, begging for help while their parents signed the form and forced them into a marriage. There's nothing the minor can do to stop that marriage, and there's nothing the clerk can do. I've spoken with clerks who said, this is heartbreaking. We need to stop doing this. And clerks feel really helpless in these situations. I mean, imagine if you were a clerk and a girl showed up sobbing, I don't want to get married. And the parents are saying, too bad, I'm signing the form. I mean, it's just really, really horrific.
That is horrific. And so, when I had heard about the work that you were doing, I reached out and we had a conversation. And of course, because I'm seeing things through this lens of religious fundamentalism being on the rise in America, my presumption was that all of these cases are religious fundamentalism. And the community you escaped from, I think I'm comfortable calling it religious fundamentalism. But in talking it through, you helped me understand that it's much more nuanced than that. It is that, but it's also more than that. So can you also explain that to everyone?
Yeah, so I guess I could take a step back and explain what we at Unchained at Last realized when we realized it's legal in all 50 states. It's creating this nightmarish legal trap. Girls are calling, begging for help. There's nothing we can do for them. And it's happening at such an alarming rate, hundreds of thousands of minors impacted. What we also realize is that there's such a simple legislative solution. There are human rights abuses that we'll all agree are awful, but we're not sure how to end them or address them. We might not be able to eliminate them in our lifetime, but child marriage is so simple to eliminate. The 300,000 minors married in the first 19 years of this century alone in the United States were all married legally. They were all handed a marriage license, because while most states at the time set the marriage age at 18, every single state had legal loopholes that allowed minors before that age to be entered into marriage with parental consent, which we know is often parental coercion or judicial approval, or if there was a pregnancy. There used to be a lot of states that had pregnancy exception, just really discuss a way to force a girl to marry her own rapist if she was raped and got pregnant. So what we realized is all you have to do to fix this is keep the marriage age at 18. We're not talking about raising the marriage age. Keep it at 18, but eliminate the dangerous loopholes. No parent and no judge should be allowed to enter a minor into a marriage before the minor even has the right to file for divorce. It just shouldn't happen. And no pregnant girl should be forced to marry her rapist. Just eliminate the loopholes. So what we started doing is we started just going state by state and working with legislators to introduce this simple, common sense legislation that, think about it, it harms no one, it costs nothing, and it ends a human rights abuse. It also helps us keep our promise under the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The United States was one of 193 countries that promised to end child marriage by year 2030. So it helps us keep our promise. There's no downside. And yet what we found in state after state was that legislators just rejected or watered down the legislation. And we got many different reasons for this. And we thought at first it would be a lot of religious fundamentalism. But what we found is that every major religion has come out in support of ending child marriage, which we were delighted to see. Jewish, Muslim, and Christian have all come out. Catholic Conference has written memos of support in multiple states saying we wouldn't recognize marriage before 18 as legitimate under any circumstances, which we took as code for even in the case of a pregnancy. But what we did have is fundamentalist religious communities, the far extreme right, like my former community, which I would consider a cult-like community, and a polygamous Mormon sect in Utah, and some weird group in New York that was worried that if we end child marriage, people might have sex outside of marriage. Gasp. So like kind of like wackadoos like that came out and said, no, we can't end child marriage. The groups that you would expect to come out, but only the far extreme right. The most common reason that we got from legislators for why they didn't want to end child marriage was just, I'm still an old-fashioned kind of guy. I still think if a girl gets pregnant, she has to get married, even if she was raped.
To me, it's still religious, but that's still religious fundamentalism. But after we talked about it, I'm like, well, that is also just misogyny and patriarchy and just horrifying, right? I mean, it's complicated. And even with what's happening this past week, you want to just say, okay, Christian nationalism, Christian fundamentalism, but the overlap, it's really hard to pull out, because when you talk to people, many devout Christians would say, that's not Christianity. That's not my understanding of the teaching of Jesus, and so on. So it is complicated. One thing that you didn't really talk about in your personal story, and I hope it's okay if I ask, because you suffered for 15 years in that marriage. Was there a spark, or was it a gradual process, or did you have a plan that you worked on for many years, or was it just like a break at one point where you just walked away? How did you get out of it?
Well, there was a really traumatic incident that made me realize I have to get out, and I have to do this on my own, because I can't rely on anyone. I can share with you. I lived in Brooklyn and was married there, but after we were married, we moved to New Jersey, Lakewood, New Jersey. There's a very large ultra-Orthodox Jewish community. And when I was there, I secretly started seeing a therapist from outside the community, which is not allowed. It was, strictly forbidden. But I only went a couple of times because it was so hard to sneak in without getting caught. But she really changed my life by explaining to me what domestic violence was, that I was I was right to be afraid for my life. I mean, my then husband would describe to me in graphic detail how he was going to kill me. So, there was, but everyone else I had gone to within my community had said, well, come on, he's just young. He doesn't mean it. He's just has a little bit of a temper. If you're good to him, he'll be good to you. Just so dismissive. And this therapist confirmed that I was right to be afraid, and explained to me what domestic violence was, something I didn't know. And then she also explained to me that the police would protect me from my own husband, that he was not allowed to be violent toward me, and that I could get police help. And that was something I hadn't known, that I could get something called a restraining order. That's what it's called in New Jersey. A protective order is called a restraining order. So after a particularly violent incident at home, I believe I was the first woman in the Orthodox Jewish community in Lakewood, New Jersey, to walk into the police department based on this therapist's advice, and to ask for a restraining order against my then husband. And, the police, they made a lot of insensitive remarks because they were not accustomed to dealing with somebody from that community, but they did serve my then husband. They removed him from the home, and it should have been a good first step towards safety and freedom. But it wasn't, because what I had not taken into account was I had always been taught as an Orthodox Jew, one of the gravest sins I could commit was turning over my fellow Jew to the secular authorities. Its sin is called Mesira. It's punishable by death. And by going to the police, I had committed this sin. So everyone I knew, everyone in my community, my family, my friends, my neighbors, rabbis, all started calling me at the same time, just flooding my phone saying, are you crazy? What have you done? Who does this? Who goes to the police? And the rabbis in Lakewood sent an attorney to my house. An Orthodox Jewish male attorney showed up at my house and drove with me to family court, and had me stand in front of the judge and tell the judge that I wanted to drop the restraining order. And it was that surreal moment when the judge asked me whether I was dropping the restraining order willingly. And I had this surreal moment where I was looking at him, And I was thinking to myself, no, I'm terrified now. This guy standing next to me is not my attorney. They sent him here to like bring me here against my will. I don't know what to do. And I couldn't find any safe way to communicate that to the judge. So I just lied. I said, yes, Your Honor, because I just couldn't think of what else to do in that moment. And it was finally that day, I was 27, that I finally put a plan in place to get out. And that plan took 5 years, Paul. That was not an easy overnight escape. It took me 5 years I saved up cash. And the only place in the house that my abusive, controlling husband didn't look, he would look through all my personal belongings in front of me, down to the pockets of my skirts hanging in the closet, so that I would know that I belonged to him and everything I owned belonged to him. The only safe place in the house was a box of whole grain Total in the pantry closet. So I started stashing cash in a box of cereal in the pantry closet over 5 years. And I became the first person in my family to go to college. I defied my family and my husband and my community, and did something forbidden, applied to Rutgers University and got my degree over 5 years. And then at 32, with my degree and my cereal box full of cash, more than $40,000 that I saved up over 5 years, I was able to change the locks and file for divorce.
Wow. Well, it's an incredible story. And that's why I said inspiring at the beginning of the conversation, because it blows me away. And I don't know that I would have the strength to do it. And I really appreciate that you did, and that you're sharing this story. And I also just feel horrified thinking about how many other women must be trapped in similar situations who have no idea. And, I also talked about Jews for Secular Democracy being this pluralistic initiative, and there's this huge spectrum in the Jewish community. And I know that I'm on one pretty far side of that spectrum because I'm openly atheist. But it's really hard for me to be completely pluralistic to the other side of that spectrum when I hear stories like this, and know that it's not isolated. It's the norm. And I want to confirm the word cult that you use, because if you just look at the actual definition of cult, it checks all the boxes, and just the harrowing escape that you had to go through is what people have to go through to get out of cult. So it's very challenging, and especially in the environment we're in now. I don't want to go off too much on this, but as a Jewish community that's now trying to organize around fighting for freedom of religion in America, we have this own segment within our community that's applauding what's happening. And even though it's like 83 to 85% of American Jews support legal abortion, there's a lot of op-eds and so on, because we have to present like the fair and balanced, even though it's not balanced. 85% of Jews support abortion access. So, these kind of things really frustrate me. And it's why I really appreciate that you are sharing your story, and that you've had some really remarkable successes so far with your organization. So can you lead us a little bit through, once you're finally free, to then not leave other people behind, to try to go back and get them by starting this organization? How did you start it? And I know you've had some successes, so can you tell us a bit about those successes as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, thank you. And that's a good way to think about it, that I went back for the others in my former community, and in every culture, religion, community you can think of across the US. We've helped survivors. I know from my own experience how terrifying and traumatic and lonely the journey was to get out of my forced marriage. And I know that most people just need a little bit of support while they're getting out. And there was before Unchained, nowhere for them to go, for them to get the kind of understanding. There's no other organization in the US that is dedicated to ending forced and child marriage and helping people escape and advocating for social policy and legal change. So that's why I founded Unchained at last. I founded the organization in 2011, and at first it was an all-volunteer organization. I was a single mom working full-time and didn't have a whole lot of time. I wrote up a business plan that said I would, spend a couple of hours a week on the side in addition to my full-time job, and we would help 5 women. We thought it would all be women, 5 women the first year, 10 women the second year. And by the end of the first year, we had 30 clients. So it just quickly became clear that there was such a great need for this. That was without any marketing, just completely word of mouth, without any staff, without any budget. So we've grown from there. In 2015, we raised enough money that I was finally able to give up my other job. I call it my real job, but I guess now I look back as my fake job. I was a private investigator, and become a full-time staff at Unchained. And we've grown since then. We now have a team of 7. We just created our 7th position, looking to hire a development manager. If any of you do development work or know somebody, that position is listed on our website, unchained.last.org. And then in terms of our successes, so really proud that we've been able to help more than 800 individuals, providing, it's not like there's no one that we work with where it's like 5 minutes or 5 days or even 5 weeks. I mean, really crucial, comprehensive wraparound services, often life-saving services, everything from helping people escape, sometimes internationally with help from the State Department, to just any kind of service that they need to help them not only get out of a bad situation, but rebuild their lives, become financially and emotionally independent, in many cases after their families have shunned them, the way my family did to me. And we never charge for any of our services, always for free. And we provide free legal representation for divorce and child custody battles, and immigration matters for those brought from another country, trafficked to the United States under the guise of marriage. That happens a lot, unfortunately, and often helping people to change their name legally under seal to stay safe from a family that continues to search relentlessly for them, determined to retaliate against them for daring to escape. So very proud that we've been able to do that. And then on the advocacy side, we started the movement to end child marriage in all 50 states, 5 territories, 1 district, and at the federal level. There's some legislation at the federal level we want to pass as well. We started that in 2015. And at first, as I was saying, we couldn't get any legislator to listen to us. So we couldn't get any state to pass the legislation. And in a moment of sheer frustration, we all promised that when the first US state finally took the drastic step of ending child marriage, we would all get tattoos to commemorate the victory. And here is my tattoo.
Oh, that's awesome. A broken chain.
It's a broken chain. I was unchained. We all got a broken chain theme tattoo because in 2018, Delaware, which was the first state, became the first state to end child marriage. And then since then, we also have been able to end child marriage in 5 additional states, a total of 6 states. 2 territories, American Samoa and US Virgin Islands have also ended child marriage. We have at this point only 44 states, 3 territories, 1 district, and the federal government to go. Oh, hi, Nomi. Nomi says we're getting close in Michigan. I didn't realize that was Nomi from Michigan. That's so funny. Great to see you here, Nomi. And saying we're getting close is maybe exaggerating a bit in Minnesota. Nicole says we're not giving up in New Hampshire. Some of us have given up on New Hampshire, where we've tried many times. No, I promise. We're going to get to every state, but New Hampshire might be the last one. It's going to be behind Mississippi.
Oh my God.
And then by the way, we have a 7th state coming very soon. Within the week, we expect to have very good news out of Massachusetts. Is anyone here from Massachusetts?
I know we've got members of our community in Massachusetts. I don't know if any joined us, but Nicole is also giving up on New Hampshire. That's fantastic. And it's so encouraging. And frankly, I think sometimes it's like a snowball rolling downhill, where when other states see that it's been done, I mean, sadly, this is how the religious right has been so successful on so many things, has been this using the same bills in state houses from state to state. So maybe this will finally work in our favor in the other way, and other states will see that this is doable and get it done. So that is really encouraging. And if folks so Nomi actually is organizing for Jews for Secular Democracy in Michigan as well. What can folks in Michigan, or what can folks, I think you also have a group in Florida. I know Florida must be a tough nut to crack just in general. What can folks do?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
What can folks do in their respective states to help?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. So, so first of all, we have in every state where we have introduced legislation, we have formed a coalition to end child marriage. And so that's by no means in the Michigan Coalition to End Child Marriage. Go to our website, unchained@last.org, and you can see whether you can join a coalition. So if we already have one in your state, we'll have you join that. And if we don't yet have one in your state, we will let you know that as soon as we form one, we will reach out to you because, as I said, we're going to get to all 50 states. But on our website, we also have a lot of other ways that you can get involved. And if we don't have a coalition yet in your state, there are other ways that you can get involved. Simple things like follow us on social media and share, tweet, retweet, like, let's spread the word, raise awareness. And when we have, if you join our email list, and when we have specific actions like an email campaign in your state targeting legislators, a specific legislator in Michigan, for example, Nomi knows who I'm talking about, who is holding up the legislation in Michigan, will have targeted email campaigns asking people to reach out to them. So, join our email list so you'll know when we have those campaigns, and, donate. Just, we're a small nonprofit with a tiny team trying to do a really big project. So, donate. There are just so many ways. I always say it takes a village to end forced and child marriage. Just be a part of that village, please.
One last thing, we had talked about this also when we first met, was the way that forced marriage is a bit more complicated than child marriage, where there is a boundary of age that you can verify. And then what would the steps be in the future? Like, what are the goals in terms of addressing forced marriage?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So and by the way, our website is unchained@last.org. So with a child marriage is easier to define. It's a marriage in one or both parties is under age 18. A forced marriage, like my family would say, well, you didn't say no, so it's harder to look at a marriage and say this was definitely a forced marriage. We can say objectively whether it was a child marriage. Forced marriage is more subjective. It is also, therefore, child marriage is easier to quantify. You can collect marriage certificate data and you can see how many marriage certificates were issued to somebody under age 18. Nowhere on your marriage certificate does it say whether you were forced to marry. So it's just much more difficult to quantify. And then for both of those reasons, forced marriage is also more difficult to legislate, because it's the quantifying and the defining are where you would be able to write effective legislation. Now, it's not impossible, though. The UK, for example, has done a really good job of defining forced marriage and providing civil and criminal remedies for those who are in or facing a forced marriage or have been in one. So there's, there are ways that we can do that, and we are looking to do that eventually. We thought ending child marriage would be quick and easy because it's so obvious, and then immediately we'd be able to turn to forced marriage. And it turns out ending child marriage is a lot more time consuming than expected. But we are also at Unchained, we're about to launch this big study, the first of its kind. We're partnering with Columbia University, and we're going to study forced marriage, forced marital sex, and forced reproduction in the United States by doing a case study of the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community in New York City, where I was subjected to all three of those: forced marriage, forced marital sex, and forced parenthood. So we are going to be doing that and looking at what can we learn from these abuses in that community to address it there, and also a bigger picture of where we know this is happening, obviously, in other communities and cultures across the US. How can we address that?
That's great. And so you mentioned Columbia, and I was just wondering, because I saw it come up in a couple of questions, do you have other institutional partners? Someone asked about the League of Women Voters, and I think earlier someone had asked about, I think, the ACLU. Yeah. Are you partnered with groups like that?
So so we have a lot of really great partners, groups that we work with across the United States who join all our coalitions. We also have a national coalition to end child marriage that focuses on federal legislation. And so we have a lot of great partners who are in those groups, like UNICEF USA, Zonta. I don't know if anyone here is from Zonta, and we've AHA Foundation. We've had some really great partners. With ACLU, we've had And it looks like somebody, I think somebody put in a question before about the ACLU. In most states, the ACLU was, supportive of our work, but kind of stayed silent. It's not really their issue, kind of stayed out of it. They just got out of the marriage equality fight, and they just, this just was not their thing. But we actually had in 2 states, California and Illinois, the reason the legislation didn't pass was because the ACLU publicly came out in support of child marriage and opposed ending child marriage, based on the most ridiculous, senseless, idiotic grounds. Thank you, Nicole. Exactly. Just what? I'm going to clarify that. It's a what the fuck. It really is. So, yeah. And, their position has been, well, marriage is a fundamental right. It's a civil liberty. It should not be denied to anyone, is kind of the argument. And then,
so strange.
Every state already sets an age limit on marriage. It's been very well established that even though it is a civil liberty and a fundamental right, every state already sets an age limit on it. And it's 18, and then they have these loopholes. So even in California and Illinois, where ACLU said this, there are already limits in place. And it just completely illogical. And I pointed out, what else is a civil liberty? Buying a gun. So does that mean 2-year-olds should be allowed to buy a gun? And the
everything, voting, driving, all of it.
Right. Well, driving is not a civil liberty per se, but voting certainly is. So 2-year-olds should be allowed to vote. And I think that the ACLU says, yeah, a 2-year-old should be allowed to buy a gun and vote. So if any of you are looking to going to a 2-year-old's birthday party and looking for a gift, a gun, according to the ACLU, would be just the thing to buy.
It's horrifying, but also fascinating. Probably could be a whole separate conversation. There was actually an article that was shared by some executive directors in the Jewish social justice ecosystem about the generational differences within nonprofit organizations. And they talk specifically about ACLU and the younger generation of ACLU being unhappy with the older, obviously, management level. The older comes from this purist ethos of like protecting free speech at all costs. They protected, the Proud Boys who rioted in Charlottesville and so on, because the highest value is free speech. And there's a younger generation that's roiling over it because they're also looking at it from a moral perspective of who are these people and why should we bother? But as someone who's, not young anymore, I can empathize with the approach. And it's the same way that, somebody has to be the defense attorney for a mass murderer. They feel like they're taking on this role that actually protect, but that argument to me doesn't even make any sense. So.
It really makes no sense. And there's other absurdity, and I can spend, hours just going through the point by point, their idiocy. But the most important thing here is that there are only 2 ACLU affiliates that have taken this position. And National ACLU doesn't take a position on state legislation. So I don't want anyone to think this is all of ACLU. This is specifically ACLU of Illinois and ACLU of California. If you've been financially supporting either one of those, I suggest you stop.
Well, I have a better suggestion, which is mention it, bring it up, keep supporting them, and then bring it up, because that's how you're going to have an impact and say that this is not what you thought you were supporting. And we may have a bunch of folks on with us who are involved with ACLU, because overall, I think we like what they do, but this is shocking. And, sometimes it's just that one or two people making a bad decision that other people in the organization can help them recognize is the wrong call. But I also think that, certainly your personal story and all of the personal stories that emerge from the work that you do is so powerful and irrefutable about what the needs are here. So I think that continuing to get the word out about what you're doing and what the need is really great. Before I open it up to any other questions that folks have, is there anything else that you wanted to share that we didn't get a chance to?
Yeah, just again, look, we can end child marriage in the United States. All we have to do is band together and insist that our legislators do the right thing, pass simple common sense legislation to make the marriage age 18, no exceptions. So unless you live in, I'll go through the states that have ended child marriage. Unless you live in one of these states, we still have a lot of work to do. And even if you live in one of those states, you can help in other states. But so far we have helped to end child marriage in Delaware. I'm going to go in chronological order: Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Rhode Island, and New York. And then very soon I hope to add Massachusetts, if that becomes a thing. And ironically, we might also be able to add Idaho soon. We kind of fell into a litigation approach in Idaho. It fell into our laps. We haven't tried a litigation approach before as a case pending before the Idaho Supreme Court. We're waiting for a decision any day now. And the justices of the oral arguments seem very open to striking down child marriage in Idaho, of all places.
Wow. That's fantastic. Yeah, it's so disappointing about California because they're leading the way on so many other things that are progressive values. So that's very surprising. Hopefully they'll figure it out. One question that came up is, how does the ending of Roe affect this effort, if at all?
So, the ending of Roe doesn't exactly impact our work doesn't exactly directly impact forced and child marriage, but it's obviously, these are overlapping issues in that they both are just hellacious and shocking examples of patriarchy destroying lives and taking away agency from women and girls, taking away their right to dignity, to the right to make decisions for themselves, the right to to get to adulthood and then decide on their own if they want to marry and have children. And it's consistent with a country that allows minors as young as 0 to be entered into marriage. Yeah, that would be a country that would say reproductive health care is a crime.
Right. Or like you said earlier, the politician who feels like if you get pregnant, then the solution is marriage, regardless of age. So, someone was unclear, and I guess I'm a little unclear too, because you did talk about the advocacy on the state level and also on the federal level. And it would seem like if something could happen on the federal level, then you don't have to keep going on the state by state level. Is that in play? Is that an option, or is it because you've got a split in the Senate that we're not hopeful?
No, the problem with that is that, since the beginning of the United States, the age at marriage has been fairly well established to be within the purview of states' rights, not federal rights. So if we tried to do something at the federal level, we probably would end up mired in a whole states' rights debate, perhaps another civil war, which maybe we're heading there anyway, who knows? But we now have 2 different countries, it's so. But in any case, putting that aside, it would just turn into a whole debate about states' rights, and nobody would even remember we were here to talk about child marriage. So when it comes to setting the marriage age, unfortunately, instead of just passing one, I shouldn't say just, because passing federal legislation is, of course, obnoxiously difficult, but we can't just pass one federal law. We have to go state by state, territory by territory, and District of Columbia. But what we are doing at the federal level is we are pushing for legislation to address certain federal statutes and policies that right now allow and even encourage child marriage. For example, under the immigration law, that's a federal law. Immigration law right now in the United States does not specify any minimum age to petition for a foreign spouse or fiance, or to be the beneficiary of a spousal or fiance visa. And so what that does is it encourages, it incentivizes the trafficking of girls under the guise of marriage. We have seen girls in the US forced to marry adult men overseas so that the men can get a visa and a path to citizenship. And the opposite, we have seen girls trafficked to the US under the guise of marriage. And so right now, that's an example of a federal law that is allowing and even encouraging child marriage that we want to see changed. And I see what's so great that Rachel's here from DLA Piper, which is one of the largest, if not the largest, law firms in the world. And we're very, very proud to have DLA Piper's support, doing a lot of the legal research that we've done and a lot of the advocacy. Was that Rachel saying something?
Yeah, hi, Fraidy. It's a privilege to help with this project.
Oh, thanks so much, Rachel.
Thanks for being here. So I'm sorry, tell me again about DLA Piper. It's a law firm. Are they doing work on this issue?
Yeah, so DLA Piper has been extremely generous with doing a lot of pro bono legal research, a lot of pro bono help in general, and financial support, I should add. So DLA Piper and White and Case are two examples of law firms, large law firms that have been extremely generous and supportive in helping us to do this. We're a tiny, tiny team at Unchained. There are 7 of us, and we're taking on this like whole country, this whole patriarchal, messed up country. So there's no way we can do it without help from DLA Piper and our other allies. So thank you very much.
That's really fantastic to hear. Thank you. If anyone has any more questions, we have just a couple more minutes, and you can unmute yourself if you want to ask instead of type. And I'm sorry if I missed anything in the chat. Yes.
I have a question. Do married minors need to go to school still?
Okay. So here's the thing. In some states, once a minor is married, they are automatically emancipated. And, on the one hand, you would think that could help, because that means that all the disabilities of non-age that I discussed before, where they can't file for divorce, they can't retain an attorney, they can't get into a domestic violence shelter, all of that, you'd think it would solve those problems. However, this automatic emancipation actually is extremely dangerous. And one of the reasons is that it typically terminates parents' financial obligation to the teen, and automatic emancipation without anyone looking at whether the teen is financially independent and whether that makes any sense. I mean, we have kids as young as 10 getting married. And if we say, well, we're taking away your parents' financial support, and we know that 70 to 80% of marriage before 18 ends in divorce, this automatic emancipation is extremely dangerous. And we have seen parents use it as an incentive. It's an incentive for forced marriage. The case in Idaho that I talked about, that's what it's about. It was a guy who paid a man money to marry his 16-year-old daughter to get out of a child custody battle. And we have seen parents do it to get out of a child support obligation. It's really horrific. And then there's, I can talk all day just about how the emancipation is so problematic. But so in those states, I'm not sure, because emancipation, also an emancipated minor has only limited legal rights, and it's often unclear what they are. So I'm not sure in states if an emancipated minor would still be obligated to stay in school. There's a lot of lack of clarity about this, because nobody sat down to figure out how all these laws should work together. In fact, they often contradict each other, like the statutory rape laws contradicting the child marriage laws, and the contract laws contradicting child marriage laws. They're all so self-contradictory and so unclear. But keep in mind that most of the minors who marry in the US are age 16 and 17. And I don't know what age compulsory education usually goes until, but we don't have a whole lot of little kids marrying in the United States.
Right. Okay. I think we only have time for one more question, and R. Colin had their hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I don't know. It's so complicated, but it occurred to me. Did you ever try to use the rape within marriage statutes that are on the books in a lot of states in order to at least remove the husband from the home or have him jailed, and thereby at least relieving and buying time until the girl is older?
So say it again, which law?
The rape within marriage.
Rape within marriage.
See, so here's the problem. While marital rape now, I think every state now recognizes marital rape as a crime, most states do not recognize statutory rape within marriage as a crime. Wow. Statutory rape. So in most states, what would otherwise be considered rape, in some cases felony rape. Get a marriage license, it's a get out of jail free card. Nobody will prosecute you.
Wow. And we know how difficult just the law around rape is anyway, and trying to get convictions for that. Peter, last question.
it's about, are there any clergy from pulpit to bema to any kind of bully pulpit speaking against this to their, lack of a better term, flock, to their own people? So on the retail level around the country in the clergy world.
Well, so, you know, in the interfaith community, other than the, as I was saying, the far extreme right, the far extreme religious right, the interfaith community fully supports ending child marriage. And we've had, you know, interfaith, you know, clergy members and others coming forward to testify in support of ending child marriage. I don't know what's happening in the congregations because, like Paul, I'm a devout atheist, so I don't go to any kinds of services.
But I'm a congregational atheist.
Oh, you're a congregational atheist. No.
Well, I run humanistic Judaism, okay. But I help run it. But I think that Peter, what he's getting at was the tension I also kind of addressed, which is pluralism within the Jewish community. Like, can UJA Federation of New York speak out around these issues when they want to be an umbrella for all of the Jewish community, and that includes this small segment that's doing a lot of damage? I don't think UJA Federation could speak out about this. I
asked for their support and they said they could not because they did not want to offend the Orthodox Jewish community.
So that is a piece where I feel like everyone else to the left of ultra-Orthodox needs to communicate with UJA Federation of New York. I mean, if you talk about the power of your donation, you know, if Federation hears from enough secular and liberally religious Jews about this issue, then maybe they will, or maybe they'll at least bring some people around a table to talk about it, as opposed to just not even mentioning it. But the default is generally silence, and that is not what's needed here. Anyway, I want to be mindful of your time and everyone's time, but I knew this was going to be so informative. It is amazing work that you're doing, and I'm so appreciative of it. And I hope that we could be of help to you in whatever way is possible. And we are also trying to organize folks on the ground around separation of church and state issues. I still feel like we can include this in certain ways as well, so that if we can be of help activating people on the ground and or in any other ways, we're happy to do it. And we're just so appreciative. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Paul. And thank you, all of you. Yeah, it'd be great if we could partner. Unchained@last.org to learn more and see how you can help.
Awesome. Thanks. Good night, everybody. See you soon.